AMC. Chief Mills asked me to go ahead and introduce the next guest speaker. We had the honor in 2016 to get him to speak at Oklahoma City Gathering, Loads. I'm an astute reader and studier of Eagle Claw, so it was like a real honor to bring him in. I've made just about everyone that's ever worked for me read up a bunch, understand why we're here, what we do, and it was pretty cool to put it into perspective in 2016. So without further ado, the current Deputy Director of SOC North, Glenn Nickel.
Thank you. You know what's amazing is you guys just heard Rocky's story. Very few of us operators have ever met any of the guys who were at the other end. So we're actually just coordinating with them. We're trying to get Special Operations Command for next year for the 40th, bring in this as many as they can of the hostages, of the assaulters, of the staff side that did it, that supported it. As I walk through my briefing, I'm going to kind of skip around a bit because what I want to show in it is not just the tactical event about trying to rescue the hostages, it's the impact of the mission. The 8 men that died on that night, 5 of them being Air Force, 3 of them being Marines. One of the men on the mission, at the time he was a captain, he retired twice as a 4-star, the first time as the commander of Special Operations Command, and then Secretary Rumsfeld brought him out of retirement to be the Chief of Staff of the Army when the war started off with Iraq, because Secretary Rumsfeld didn't like the caliber of the people that were the generals in the Army at the time. So he actually brought a guy out of retirement, and I was on. To say I know the guy is an understatement. I was on the blind date where he met his wife, so I've been friends with him for a long time. But saying that, he coined the phrase, General Schumacher coined this mission, the most successful failure. Because if we had not had the issues that I'm going to walk you through, and then fast forward to Grenada 3 years later, the same kind of issues came up again. That's when the 2 senators, Goldwater and Nichols, did the law, taking the authority of the warfighter away from the Pentagon. Because up until the Goldwater-Nichols Act in 1986, implemented really in 1987, that's when the warfighting function went to the Geographic Combatant Commanders, Southcom, CENTCOM, EUCOM, all those guys. Because before that, they traced it back. If you guys love history, the book to read is History on the Potomac. That's the book that the staffer that supported those 2 senators showed during World War II, Korea, Vietnam, all the time that we had fratricide among each other because the war chiefs were not bringing together things joint. Think of D-Day. So my father-in-law was in on Normandy Beach. The Navy ships were shooting down the glider, the planes flying overhead, because the Navy guys hadn't been told they're going to be the DC-3s bringing in the gliders going on the rest of them. So we were killing our own out of ignorance. And in that book, Victory on the Potomac, it cites those examples showing why it didn't work. So as I walk through my brief, I want to kind of more, not just the tactical piece, but the historic piece of what was going on then. And because I'm still serving today as in the GS capacity, what I'm seeing today and how history repeats itself. So bear with me as I go through this. And anywhere during here, please ask questions. Obviously, you know the story behind these 8, so I'll continue on. I do want to say, after this mission, you know President Reagan was voted in by 90% popular vote. He sent out his vice president to see if this is the only force I had, because at that time Delta Force was the only standing special ops unit like that. So he said, if this is all I got to use, how good are they? So the vice president came out, and my team, we just got through doing from this picture, a live fire. We had him in the shooting house, and he was in the corner. We did live fire shooting with the vice president with the lights on, lights off. Secret Service didn't like that too much, but he was pretty cool about it. So that's why he's shaking our hand. We left him alive. The other important part of that, about that picture, is most important. It shows that I was young and handsome once. That's the other part of it. Well, let me go back for a second. If you look at that picture, that Delta Force was the ground force. Obviously, a lot of people have made the opinion that we failed on the mission. Well, we never even got to the mission, as you guys will know. But saying that, that's just how the story goes. But if you look at my hair, this is after the mission now. So look at my hair, look at the guns I'm carrying. You don't see any Mark 4s or Car 15s back then. Delta Force was designed to be a permissive counterterrorism unit. Back in the 60s, we had domestic terrorism. If any of you guys remember, the Sudanese Liberation Army took Patty Hearst, and her dad was a newspaper magnate out of Los Angeles. We had a lot of problems, and this goes to the historical side. So President Johnson despised Edgar Hoover, and so he wouldn't use the FBI, so he had the Army tracking domestic terrorism. So from that was the birth of Executive Order 12333 that precludes DOD from tracking U.S. people. That's how all this terrorism ties in. So in the 70s, I'll talk to that in a bit, there was stuff going on, but the United States did not have a counterterrorism force. So Colonel Beckwith happened to know the Chief of Staff of the Army, and he kept, hey, we need the CT force, and the United States needs this. And so it was actually during President Carter's time when he stood us up. But when we stood up, we did not even have a 5.56 caliber weapon at the team level, because we thought we'd be going into places with 9mm and 45s, because our whole thought was, if there's planes, trains, and automobiles were being hijacked back then, they thought if that country has a problem, we have a U.S. interest, we would go in, and if we went right, they would take the credit. If it went wrong, we would take the blame. That was the deal. And we didn't have the AFSOC, Air Force Special Operations Command capabilities we have today. So we had no way to infiltrate a lot of those countries low vis. So that's why we had long hair. We'd go in with a blue passport, tourist passport, we'd go in as a bunch of individuals coming in by different directions, link up at the right place, have our weapons there, we'd go do our magic and return home. But that's what we didn't have then that we now have today out of these failures. So Rocky's already covered the whole process there very well. It was a great honor to hear him talk. He mentioned a couple times about Iran. I know there's some guys here who flow, talking to you earlier. Iran, prior to Ayatollah Khomeini, they were our best ally in the area. We gave them every state-of-the-art equipment. They had F-4s, F-14s, they had 53 helicopters, they had our SIGINT and our radar capabilities. Why? Because they were our eyes and ears against the USSR. The Shah, for 30 years, had westernized Iran. If you walk downtown, who saw the movie Argo? All right, and if you look at it, look at their dress. They look like we're standing here today. They were as westernized as we were. How the media, and you'll hear this repeated through this part of my briefing, the media, international media, found out that the Shah's secret service, called the Savak, had over about his 30-year time frame, about 3,000 people had died in their prisons. Guys went in as dissidents, some didn't come out. Does anybody not think that happens today? If you go down to South America, you go down to Africa, and you get rolled up in one of those prisons, not as a uniform guys, but somebody else, you may not come out. That happens today. It happened. It's not the right thing, but it happened. But the media, international media, said the Shah is bad. Look, he's killed over 3,000 people. 3,000 people died. He's a terrible person. But that peace-loving Ayatollah guy, he's the guy we want back. He's good. He's in asylum in France. We'll get him in there. The first year that the Ayatollah was in power, how he took power away from, how he enforced his power and got people to buy in from being westernized to going into the traditional dress and going back to the Islamic law, was through, if anybody in a family was a dissident, they'd bring the whole family out and execute that family publicly. Well, how many of you would like to have your life depending upon teenagers? I mean, if somebody rioted, they yanked that kid and the family tribe, executed him. That's how in the first year, he was able to convert our best ally to now our enduring enemy. And saying that, they killed over 30,000 in the first year, and what did our media do? turned its direction somewhere else, just like it does today, right? And now, I mean, in the old days when us old gray hairs grew up, it was China, Russia, and the United States were the triad. Now I think for your generation, your kids' generation, it's going to be Iran's going to be our enemy for that period. I think that's where we're at. So this is the terrorist events I was mentioning, happened in the 70s, and this is the birth of Delta. The two in gold there are the ones where President Carter was in power. So in 76, when Israelis did their job effectively, President Carter asked his national security advisor, hey, do we have a capability to counter it? And the guy said, of course we did. We didn't, but he just never asked. He just assumed we did. So in 77, when the Germans, who failed in 72 with the Olympics there, and PLO went over the wall and got the Israeli athletes, when they did their mission successfully, Carter says, I want to go see that unit. That was the birth of Delta. So 77. I want to go to the first one for a second, 1970. This goes to the intelligence side. History repeats itself. And intelligence people kind of focus on what they like to focus on. But in 1970, you had the Palestinian Liberation Army. They hijacked 4 wide-body aircraft, L-1011s, 2 DC-10s. You know, think the 747s, a little bit smaller than that, the big ones. Hijacked 4 of them and landed them on a piece of desert outside Amman, Jordan. Not an unimproved airfield, just literally a piece of desert. Negotiations were going right. They got all the hostages off. They burned up the planes, but they obviously could fly planes. I think it'd be harder to land a piece of plane on a piece of desert than fly it into a building. But what happened in 9/11? We had the same thing: 4 planes, 4 targets, and what did the intel community do? Oh shit, terrorists can fly. No kidding. They've only been doing it for 4 decades now. Our people, we forget our lessons. So going back to you guys, you have to pay attention to what history repeats itself. Our problems with Iran, our problem with terrorists. So keep a focus on that. So what happened there? Rocky already covered how it all went down. The first time it was overrun was in February. They decreased the staff to mission essential. And so when it was overrun again on the 4th, some people have opined that they thought it would be as quick, same thing. They'd overrun it, they'd get some, they'd make some statements and they'd get the U.S.'s attention, but it'd be returned. So nobody thought it would turn into what it turned into. While this was occurring, think now global power stuff. You guys remember when Soviet Union went into Afghanistan, 1980? Does anybody remember the day of the year? Christmas Day. Do you think that was an accident that the Soviet Union or any country would make a move on our big holiday? What my point on this is, and this is again where history repeats itself, I kind of look at our nation's security is kind of like a 3-legged stool. You guys know a 3-legged stool can be a little off even, but still quite stable. If you have a strong president, and this is perceived by others now, a strong president, a strong military, and public will, we're invincible. Look what we did with Bush when we went into Iraq. We went in with mighty power, we got stuff done. Go back to the era that this occurred, President Carter was not perceived as being strong by others. Our military was just after Vietnam. You'd heard the stories about the Rocky repeated over and over again. We did nothing for the POWs who were there. There's actually an operation called Triple Nickel that we tried to get them back afterwards, but I don't have time to talk about that now. But we had people from Vietnam were coming home being spat on the street. No public will. Our military was fairly, it had been neutered after Vietnam. It's been cut deeply. President Carter, there was a big rift going on like that. We were cutting people out left and right. It wasn't a good time. So you had a weak president, a weak military, and no public will. And Soviet Union went in, and what did we do when we were angry with them? We issued a démarche. We tried to pound some money. We had no ability to stop them. But that, have you guys seen that kind of weakness shown in the last 20, 30 years? Even less? So, going to the mission now. We were set up with a very streamlined chain of command. We had the NCA stands for National Capital Command Authority, and that actually put it in the box the President and the Secretary of Defense. In today's doctrine and stuff, you see the President separated from the SecDef, but back then it was one bin. And you had the chairman and the four service chiefs, because back then they were the war fighters. So they were the guys in the middle, and then you had our commander, Major General Vaught. He was an Army aviator, helicopter pilot, and so that came into, was very helpful for this mission, but it was a streamlined chain of command. Operational security was so stringent, though, that the chairman personally said that only he could approve who was read onto the mission. So like when we graduate an operator class out of Delta, we had to take those names up to the chairman. You think things move fast getting them up to the chairman? Not so fast. That impacted the mission planning because we were all ad hoc units. It's kind of like the units when they came together. It's like playing an all-star team instead of a regular team. You know, all great people, but they didn't know each other. Didn't know each other's capabilities, didn't know how to talk to each other, and communications back then were very different than today, no VTCs, anything. But it's basically a lot of ad hoc units trying to work together, and I'll talk more about that as I go through the briefing. So this is what they look like. I think you guys recognize President Carter on the left. Behind President Carter was the Secretary of Defense, Mr. Brown. To his left is General Vaught, all cleaned up. Down in the bottom right is General Vaught and Colonel Beckwith, our first commander. This is as we're loading the aircraft, getting ready to go into Iran. This guy here, Secretary Cyrus Vance, he was the Secretary of State. But prior to him being the Secretary of State, he had been the Deputy Secretary of Defense. He was so adamantly opposed to a military option that he told Carter, if you do this mission with the military, I'm going to resign on you. And that's what he did. That just shows the dysfunctionality within the cabinet, the lack of cohesion. And then this is the guy's, Brzezinski. He was the national security advisor. He was born in Poland, but hated communism. He escaped when he was in his teens. So he was a great national security advisor because he understood communism and he hated it. But he was the one that when Carter asked him, do you have a counterterrorism force? He said, well, of course we do. He just assumed a great nation like us would have something like that. I'm going to fast forward for a second. So my background, I got to Delta in 1977 as in the very first selection course. I was only there for 18 years, so not long enough to make a career out of it, but you could say I liked it. We actually trained up the FBI's hostage rescue team in '83. So I know the interagency side, but over beer tonight, I can tell you some other stories about that. So this is what it looked like on the other side. So you had the Shah that I've already talked to you about how the media painted him as bad. You had the Ayatollah in the center, and then you got the guy on the right, Groucho Marx's son. It's Beni Gazzar. He was the president under the Shah, and the Ayatollah kept him on for about the first year of the hostage rescue event. And the Ayatollah actually used Beni Gazzar. Beni Gazzar would go to reportedly went to the Ayatollah and says, first world countries don't keep hostages, diplomatic status. That country is responsible for maintaining security of anybody in their border. So holding hostages, like Rocky mentioned, he thought when they first got overrun that the plan was for the country to come get them out. And they didn't. That's because Iran's it's a first world economy, but a third world country. And so, Ayatollah used Beni Gazzar to negotiate with Carter, and the Ayatollah just played them both on. And if you guys read President Carter's book, his memoirs about the mission, you'll see how all the times that Carter would give sanctions and give things back to Iran, and then we would get nothing in return. And so when they came back to the negotiating table, where did they start? At the place they finished. They never went back to square one. And he always ceded terrain. Did we see that in the last couple of years? So here I already talked about the responsibility of a first world country to take care of our embassy, and that. Did Rocky mention, I came in late, did he mention who this was here? No. Take a look at him. You recognize that guy?
The president.
Ahmadinejad. So the president of Iran from 08 to 12 He was running for re-election for the third time, and the Ayatollahs were so afraid of him being so popular that they're the ones who undercut him so they wouldn't lose power. But he was the president of Iran, one of the key student interrogators, keeping the hostages. Also in his tenure in 2011, they did a repeat. They had Iranian students go over the wall of the British embassy in 2011, just before the Olympics. He was trying to see if that would work again. That didn't. They were able to negotiate that back. So, in Canada's help, the movie Argo, I won't cover that again, but I do want to focus you on one part here on this lower portion. Do I get any former Marines in here? I was always asked that question because when I ask people to read the slide, I look for Marines, the lips stop moving and know everybody else is ready. But if you guys are going to cheat here, I won't have any cues like that. But so the question I have here to you is, why do you think it had to go all the way to their version of Congress to get approval to use Canadian passports for American citizens to get them out? And you guys know the idea was Ayatollah Khomeini, when he released the first tranche of hostages, Rocky mentioned it, it was with the exception of the Marine security guards, it was the females and the other racial minorities were the ones that Ayatollah Khomeini released. He was trying to paint a picture that he was against the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male, because that was his world vision of what United States was all about. So he released those. We saw that as a chink in his armor, and so the CIA and Canada, they worked together. They said, hey, let's go up there and tell Ayatollah, if you let us do a documentary of you, we'll show how great you are. We'll let you edit the movie before it goes out. But if you let us come in and do that, we'll paint a different picture of the world court of your, the opinion of you. So that's what he agreed. So over 100 movie makers went, actors and film, that crew cast went in to do the documentary, and when they came out, they had 6 more people. That's how we got our Canadians out. But the point being here, and Rocky mentioned it, he didn't mention the other part, when that went to all the way to Canada, Carter wanted to thank him. He did thank him publicly. So he told everybody, hey, thank you for letting us use your passports illegally to get our guys out. What did that do to the Canadians? Put in question every Canadian passport. That's why it was a classified thing that they did it, but that's the kind of thing Carter did during his tenure that just kept hurting relations. Even though he was trying to be nice, it hurt our allies and partners out of just how he approached business. So the factors we considered when we went into the mission, nothing up there is different than what you guys know today. I'm going to highlight on the media again. The media, my perspective of the media is this. I think, how many of you guys have been in a country or in a riot, any place, and then you're there and you read about it later in the paper and you say, shit, I was there, it wasn't that bad. The media reports stuff for its purpose of making money. That doesn't mean it has to be accurate, because nobody holds them accountable, right? But the media causes issues then, the media causes issues now. That's a challenge that you young guys have to break the code on, because I was never able to break the code on how to use it. What's the old saying? Keep your friends close, keep your enemies even closer. You got to figure out a way to turn the media around, because right now I think they're hurting us more than they're helping us. So the pictures, you'll see these in the movie Argo as well, but these are, our intelligence was so poor that and the reason for that is President Carter, when he took over, he was a World War II vet, I think you all know. He had the opportunity of meeting him twice. He came to see us after the raid as well, like Rocky said, how he met with them. He did the same thing with all of us after the mission. He believed, like in the Bible says, treat people like you want to be treated. And so he compromised in the first year of his office. He, in an open press forum, told everybody that we had satellite capability that could see vehicles and people. So he compromised that capability. He also disbanded the CIA's human intelligence capability, because he said that's dirty tricks. A great nation like us shouldn't do it. So that impacted us, because a lot of the CIA guys, the old operatives they had, and case officers had been released. So when we went into the mission, we had no intel that was being fed to us. And so we would record every night ABC, NBC, and CBS. That's all we had back then. Didn't have Fox, CNN, that stuff. We recorded those every night, and we would look for guys like Rocky, and we would see, had they gained weight? What were they doing? What was their mental condition? And I'll talk about some more of that later. But that we got most of our intel from playing the newsreels over and over again for targeting. Oh, one thing on that, on the bottom right, Iran, as I mentioned several times, was our best ally back then. They had over 20,000 students come into college here, exchange students every year. And the families, when Ayatollah and put his rule in, the families were telling the Iranians, stay in the United States, don't come home, we'll try to come to you. But the media kept showing all these kind of pictures of the burning flags and all that stuff. Well, it created, in colleges, there were some redneck guys that would beat up some Iranians just because they were angry, and that was the closest guy to get their hands on. The media was generating hate crimes. Have we seen that in recent history as well? So what did the target look like? So inside the red outline there was the embassy grounds, 26 acres. Rocky said the chancellery was where they were held most of the time. We divided the targets. I'll mention that now. On the left-hand side was one element. We used real original naming convention. We were red, white, and blue. So we had white was going to take the left side, blue was going to take the, red was going to take the chancellery, and blue was going to take back here. This was the ambassador's residence. We kind of figured the students were hanging out there because it was nice. They had a warehouse in back that we figured they could hold lots of hostages, but they had no bathroom facilities. So that's why we're thinking the majority of the hostages would be in there, where they had both place to keep them and facilities they could clean up and that kind of stuff during the daytime. I want to highlight in the center here, you see all those cars and stuff in the open area. Back then, just like they do today, you know, all these, they had former military guys talking, hey, how would you do this mission? Well, one of the guys, talking head, said, well, I do it the same way we did in Sante Raid. Sante Raid, you know, the effort to get our POWs out of Vietnam, was only literally 10 years prior to this. We landed helicopters right in the middle of the compound, and the force split out from there. The guy mentioned that on TV. The very next day, the open areas had cars parked in there, and they had crisscrossed wires from the trees to preclude that wrap up in the helicopter blades. So right off the bat, we cut out our primary course of action just because the guy had to talk. So what did we look like back then? So we had two Iranian generals that were working with us because they were hoping to get asylum after this. There were 93 in Delta. Because we lost the option of landing our helicopters in, now we knew we needed to have vehicles. So we had to come up with a plan to go have a team infiltrate and go rent basically like Ryder trucks, U-Haul trucks, rent some of those. Well, if you got Ryder trucks, you can't have a big convoy going in because we knew there were checkpoints. So our thought was we need a driver who could speak Farsi. So we went to the Department of Defense databases, and there were a little over 100 Farsi speakers. 12 of them were assessed as having the moxie, the ability to take on this mission. One of the other guys, an Air Force NC, I'll talk to him later, was so courageous that he went in with Dick Meadows, that renting the vehicles. He was the guy who went in and did all that. He was an Air Force E5 that did that mission. But the 12 translators, the idea was if you're driving to the city and we hit a checkpoint, we had a guy who could speak the language on the left and one of our operators on the right. Our thought was if the guy can't talk his way through Farsi, well, the guy on the right would talk his way through the international language of 556. And so that was our plan. Then we had, as Rocky mentioned, there were two targets. This was where the majority of the hostages were, but there were the three hostages down at the Minister of Defense. So from this picture, drive off about 3 miles to the right-hand side, that was the Minister of Defense. That's where the Charge and two of his staff were. So we had two different targets. So we had two teams going different directions. And then we had the Rangers that were going to protect secure the airfield where we had to land in the middle of the desert. We'll talk to that later. So the enemy, we knew there were between 40 and 60 guards. At nighttime, we knew some would go, were allowed to go home. Most of the guards, we understand, were actually almost like hostages. They were stuck there as well. But they anticipated that we had tried to do a raid, and so other groups went into training. So that was the people below. They go in there and give them advice on how to secure the place, how to defend off against an attack. And then the reaction force, as I mentioned, this mission or this event was only 1 year after the Shah was in power. So we had to assume that all the aircraft and all the armament that we had given them, the F-14s, the F-4s, were still flying, still capable. Figured a couple of years after that, figured the training would have gone down, the maintenance would have gone down. But at this point, we had to plan. They had the ability to launch a fairly sizable force. And the Iranian Republican Guard, these would think they're White House Palace guards, their best force. They were literally 3 miles away from their barracks, from our place. So we knew that even if we didn't have a good wake-up call, the likelihood of us, all the noise and explosions going on, they would come. So that was what we had to work against. We figured that if we did everything right, we'd be here around the 30-minute window. But you guys know if somebody gets hurt, how much time slows down. You're patching broken wounds or whatever. Time slows down. So we figured realistically we'd be here at about the 45-minute to 60-minute mark. Again, we had to clear 26 acres to round up everybody. So this is most of in the area where this whole thing started. This was the wall that the students went over. This is the visa section. This is where the 6 that got out went out the other door. But this became kind of like the gaggle point. There was high unemployment in Iran and Tehran. So people were bored. Anything would spark any kind of unrest, they would go there. The other thing was they just hung out there because they had nothing else to do because of unemployment. Well, we had to plan that into our mission planning because it's kind of like when you guys go to church, whatever, everybody sits in the same seat all the time, right? They keep going back to where they blast that. So we knew they would be there, so we had to factor that into our plan. So what did we look like? We were divided into 3 task forces, the Army, Navy, and Air Force, and providing those different assets underneath it. I'll kind of walk us through each one as we go along. So this is we had the EC-130s were the guys carrying the fuel, and you had the MC-130s were the guys, you know what the MC-130 is going to do, that cloak into the stuff. So we had those 2 different groups, and I have the titles on there wrong. This is the MC crew, this is the EC crew. It was 5 of those guys in the back row that died that night. They were in that burning bird. My squadron was in that burning bird, and I'll tell you my part of the story in there, but we were all in there together. This guy here, J.J. Byers. Do any of you know him? He was a load master for the mission. So he has a special place in my heart. So training back then, as I mentioned, Delta, we were a permissive counterterrorism unit. We had to start everything from scratch. Take a look at our high-speed uniform there. These were, I would offer today, your kids have better shit for Halloween than we had over here. We had 9mm vests. We had off-the-shelf Bianchi holsters, jungle boots. Some people dyed them black and stuff like that. It was in the beginning days. And over here, this is the room that we actually did the shooting around the vice president. But that's what we had to start with because they had to invent everything. This is what we looked like going into the mission. I mentioned General Schumacher earlier. That's him as a captain. But here was the uniform. We had a black navy watch sweater, black dyed field jacket, the Vietnam era style, and then the black watch sweater, navy cap, and blue jeans. Does that look like a uniform? If you're not in the same right uniform, the Geneva Convention stuff doesn't apply, right? How many say that is not a uniform? Anybody? How many say it is? I'm just seeing how many are sleeping here. That was the test. Most of you failed. No. So it went all the way to the White House legal office. We had that. We had a Velcro flag on our left shoulder that we wore. In our field jackets, we had everybody had a pouch sewn in the back of it. We had $10,000. 1,000 US, 9,000 Iranian gold coin, and those escape and evasion charts that you guys are used to. Because our thought was there would not be enough helicopters to lift all the hostages and everybody out. So those who did get out, every team, we had the money in case we were the unlucky ones not getting out. We could try to bribe our way out. But every team also had a hot wire kit, because the vehicle of choice in Tehran at the time was Mercedes-Benzes. So we practiced hot wiring Mercedes-Benzes, and we're pretty good at it. And then we did the crash and bang driving that you guys now take for granted. That was the birth of that whole thing. We did that. But our thought was we'd just, get some vehicles, return them to Turkey with a thank you note. That was our escape evasion plan. This is what the Rangers look like. What do you think about this high-speed assault vehicle? Back then, you had the Gamma Goat, or you had this thing. And Jeeps are a good vehicle. We had the old Starlight scope on it. The motorcycles here. If you notice right here, I want to draw your attention to that light anti-tank weapon strapped to the front of this truck. It comes into the story later. But that's how we look. The 53s, they were the only helicopter that we figured was usable for this, even though the Air Force had flown Pablos during the Sante raid. The Pablos couldn't fold up and be stored underneath the aircraft carrier for a duration, for the time they had to be out there at sea for us to plan the mission. So we used the Navy 53s that were collapsible, because Air Force AFSOC got some later, but it was 10 years later. This was on the shelf at the time. And if you notice going in the C5A here, it was in the traditional paint scheme, and over here it was in the Iranian paint scheme, because we'd sold some to them. We had it painted, so they thought if we saw them flying, we'd hope they would think they were theirs. The challenge we had, these minesweepers, they're Navy minesweepers, and so their mission in life was, when they go out to sea with a flotilla, they're on one of the flat tops, and if they thought there were mines in front, these 53s would go out in front and they'd drop a rake in back of it, a little bit larger than the front end of the room here, and all the ships would line up behind it, so this rake would come through the water and it would explode any mines. That was their tactical flying capability. About 10 knots, about 40 feet off the water, day or night, put, 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 put. How does that prepare them to fly through mountains and into urban area land? It doesn't. So when the Navy pilots found out what the mission was, all but one quit. They all said, not trained for it, they quit. So then the Marines jumped in, and the Marines took over the mission, and that's General Schumacher. I mentioned that he called this the most successful failure. After what happened with this, he coined the phrase, never mistake enthusiasm with capability. Because the Marines would say, I can do it, Coach, I can do it, but they weren't able to deliver. So you ended up on the air crew. You had one Air Force guy who had been on Sante raid. He was a Pablo pilot, but he had cross-trained over as a 53. So he is on there. You had the rest were Marines, and you had one Navy. So this is your crew. This is all the aircraft. This was taken from Wada, Kenya. So that's what we had lined up for the day. And then for the Air Force, for the fixed wing flying, it was just a matter of a few months before this mission, the Air Force had deemed that the C-130 was not a nighttime fixed wing, night flying capable aircraft, because they looked at all the panels, things like that. So when you got stuck with the mission, they didn't even have nods, night vision goggles in the units. They had to go scrounge those. And when they first did their flying around, General Vought, being a helicopter pilot who had flown with crews at night with nods, he went out to see how your crews were doing. And what they had come up with for a tactics and technique procedure was the guy on the left would fly the plane, the guy on the right they taped up all the dash with red filter paper, and the guy on the right had the night vision goggles. He'd lean out over the front, because the nods were so poor they'd light out with bright lights. He'd look out and he'd be telling the guy on the left, how to fly that thing and how to land that thing. So when General Vought was out there testing it, he stood behind the guy on the right, and the landing was so hard that it basically buckled his knees and he throat punched himself on the back of the chair. And when he could finally talk again, he ordered everybody to put on goggles and the landing was much smoother. That's the birth of Air Force fixed-wing night flying. This mission was. And I want to highlight a couple of good things, because this mission had more good things than bad things. All the things everybody had to overcome as the different tribes. So, and this was the clarity of the night vision goggles at the time. Just very poor. So how do we train and rehearse? Do we need to take a break, or are we doing okay? Press. Okay, so 4 November was when it was overrun. We came up, this was our rehearsal, our mission planning cycle. Because of operational security, the chairman wouldn't ever let us stay together for more than 4 days. So we would come together, practice, identify things that were broken, all go back to our home station and fix it. So every time we came back together again, it was like a whole new crew again, because everybody had fixed different stuff. And it's kind of like, you know what dogs do when they first meet each other. We did that 5 times. But we went through a lot of different mission planning. So I'll walk through these things. So I already told you the first option of just landing helicopter is gone. So that one's out of that's an option. The next thing we thought of is, all of us are airborne. What if we jump in? We'll just land. Let me back up. We knew we had to refuel the 53s coming out of the Nimitz somewhere before they went into the night mission. We knew we'd have to infiltrate the first night, sleep during the daytime, and hit the next night. So those were the givens. We had to refuel them. It was going to take a 36-hour period. So the first thought was we could, a helicopter in, just airborne in. Remember those 12 Farsi speakers, those drivers? Well, they're not airborne. Well, hell, let's take in 24. We leave some on the drop zone, we'll still be okay. I can't do that to them. So airborne's out, helicopter's out. So now let's start these other options. So then we thought, well, what if we just do a heavy drop and drop all these big bladders? You guys have seen those big refuel bladders. What if we just drop those out there? Well, training was so bad back then that the riggers didn't know how to rig those things properly. So when we practiced out of Holland drop zone, C-141 flying over, drop these things out, and it was at night, we could see the light on the plane. We saw the first parachute open up, and all around us, a whole bunch of explosions. Well, the first one came out okay, but it broke the anchor line cable. So the rest of the bladders came to Earth at a rapid rate of speed. At night, dark night, explosions all around you. Your typical tendency is to run, but you can't see them, so why die tired? So after all the explosions, after all the hubbub, we rolled up the rest and ruled this option out. So then we said, what if we just go in there and seize one of the airfields? And this was you guys know the Rangers always have that airfield seizure mission. This was the birth of that. And they looked at it and they said, they determined that all the airfields inside Iran were they were manned 24/7, and we didn't have the ability to mask comms like we do today. So we figured, if they're manned, we're coming in, we're going to be too noisy. There's no way that we'd be able to stealthily seize an airfield without them doing a call for help. And as I mentioned, we had to go infiltrate one night, sleep during the day, hit the next night. We knew that likelihood of us being busted would be great. So we ruled that option out. So then it was, we have to find a way to refuel it. So some of your predecessors all got together and cobbled together the system to literally pump gas out of a 130 into a Navy 53 through all the pressures and pumps and hose. I don't know the magic behind it, but I know you Air Force guys, you can turn airworthiness certificates on the dime, right? That's easy. That's just overnight kind of stuff, right? They did it in less than 2 months. And this is what it looked like so this was the outside looking in on the ramp. That's the inside looking out. And again, it was the C-130 that was in the Burning Bird. It was a refuel bird. That's what my squadron was in. And I'll bring it up now. Go back here. I was sitting on the left-hand side there, about from me to Ray here, from the door, the main entrance crew door. So I was near the front when that happened. But I'll cover that later. And this is how much fuel they could hold. I want to draw your attention to the nice little box over here. Everybody, C Rations only had 4-pack cigarettes. You guys carried cases. So what was the plan? So we figured all that planning, what we finally came up with was how to make the plan work. So the plan was, we base out of Egypt and Wadi, Kenya. Do you guys know the Bright Star exercises that go on every year? That was going on and so we were hidden in the chaff in that because the exercise was already going on. I'll tell you a funny story about that here in a bit. But we're hidden in there, and the plan was, when given permission, we'd fly down the Red Sea, go out and around here, Indian Ocean, go to Masseria. We'd do that on 141s, would link up with the tactical, the MC-130s, and then would infiltrate into Iran. The helicopters would come off the Nimitz. They would follow the same path in Desert One, where most people call this disaster been called Desert One or Eagle Claw. Eagle Claw was actually the classified name. Desert One was where the accident took place. But we'd link up there, do the cross fuel, refuel the 53s. All the operators would get onto the 153s. The 53s would drop us off at the hide site, Desert 2. We'd sleep the day there. They would go up in the helicopters, go to the mountains at the logger site, number 3. Next night then, so sleep during the day. The next night we'd have vehicles come out of Tehran, come down to our location, would go and infiltrate on the right code. Then the helicopters come out, pick us up, would go down to Mansouriya and come out. So I got some graphics to walk you through, but that's a big picture. So again, on the vehicles, typically getting covert vehicles, things like that, that's the job of the CIA. So our headquarters went up to the CIA and said, hey, we've come up with a plan. We need you to go in and infiltrate and get us some vehicles. And the CIA said, hey, we lost all of our capability. We don't have anybody to do that. I said, okay, we'll go do it ourselves. No. You can't do that. That's our job. Yeah. We're asking you to do your job. Well, we don't have the capability. Okay, we'll go do our job. We'll go do that. No. That'll make us look bad. You can't do that. It went to the White House to tell the CIA to shut up and let us go do it. And for any of you who know about this, the Intelligence National Mission Force, this mission was the birth of that unit after that. Because the CIA had failed us for Sante raid, and now they failed us here. That's why in DOD, we grew our own capability like that. So the plan for the attack would be the vehicles, the 12 vehicles would come from different sides. As I mentioned earlier, the red, white, and blue, who would have the mission? A squadron was going to go over the back. That was that picture where those guys I showed you. They're going to go over the back and they're going to cover the ambassador's residence and the warehouse. B squadron, my squadron, we're going to come over the wall here and we're going to take the chancellery. And then because we're short people, we took all of our instructors and the people that were in their operator training course. This was their culmination exercise, a graduation exercise. And so we gave them the left-hand side here because we assessed there wouldn't be any hostages over here, so it'd be more of a free fire zone. But that's how this was their graduation exercise. One thing that the CIA did for us that was really, really good is they made a 2-scale mock-up of that whole compound, about 3/4 of the size of the stage. It was so good that we had little periscopes. Wherever there was a tree, you could put that periscope down and you could see your fields of fire. Every one of those buildings was built that you could lift the roof off, and the layout to scale was the 3rd floor layout, lift off 3rd floor, 2nd floor layout. So we spent thousands of hours around this, planning contingencies, breaching points, things like that. And it also paid off. Our plan was, do it like I mentioned, gather up all the hostages, go to the backside here, blow a hole in the embassy wall there, and go into the stadium. That's where the helicopters will lift us out of. What we didn't know, the wall around the embassy, that's a fairly big wall, blowing a hole that was not going to be an insignificant event. But in the backside here of the wall, we had planned for just infiltrating. We're just going to go up there, climb on each other's backs, do a spider drop and drop off on the other side. Because we knew where this first section was, it was only about a 10-foot drop, no big deal. On the back there here, if it had not been for that mock-up being so detailed, the ground sloped away and the wall got taller. It would have been about a 22 to 24-foot drop. How many of our guys would have broken legs? So that mock-up, so we invented collapsible ladders out of that so we could do it. And we also had to get the hostages to climb up out of there and go out. So then the plan was, come through the wall like I mentioned, gather up in here. We were going to load up all the hostages in the 53s with security on them, and if there weren't enough 53s to lift us all out, we'd go over the wall on the backside here, borrow some vehicles, and go out the other way. And over down here in the bottom left is where the crowds gathered all the time. So our plan was to go out the opposite side to buy us distance, so we didn't have to engage more than we had. We just didn't have enough ammo for all of them. Are you recording that? So, and then that would be the assault for the aircraft. They dropped us off the 141s, and then the 130s, when they did the link up here, they went back over to Watakinia, and then the next night, after we did the hit, Saudi Arabia allowed them to overfly their land to cut down on the flight time and stuff. And again, that was one of the things that President Carter thanked Saudi Arabia publicly. Well, what did they do for relationships? That just told everybody in the region that they'd been on our side. So again, that's just stuff that happened. So, and then at the final site, Mansouriya, you guys are going to fly in 2 different 141s, one rigged for hospital, one not. Anybody good would come back to CONUS. Everybody hurt would go up to Germany. That was the plan. And then to help us, they were also going to use AC-130s in there. They were the ones going to help us get out of the city on that convoy thing, and then they'd stay until first light, then we'd continue on. That was our thought. So you guys, everything goes according to plan, right? When you guys plan vacations, everything goes perfect. My being here, United Airlines had a vote on that. So the plan was Watakinia. Our team went in ahead of time. The bunkers there were built by the Russians to help Egypt fight Israel during those wars. And so our leader that went in, he was a deputy commander. He was a lieutenant colonel. But back in that day, all this digital stuff didn't matter. So when he went over there to this big exercise, an Air Force 2-star was in charge of the exercise, but he had not been read on. He had no idea. He just thought we were part of the exercise. And but our guy, we gave him a new ID card with 06 on it, with full legal, and TDY orders with 06 on it, and he wore 06. So that's you've all heard of the telephone colonel. He was he was a paper colonel. But he went in there with our guys. He went in with an advanced team. He actually took in, we had a generator and 4 big refrigerators that had blood in it, because we had gone through the records to find out on all the hostages which ones had unique blood, which had unique medical stuff. We found out some of them were diabetic, some of them used to be alcoholics. So we assumed those people bleed out faster. So if you get somebody that's injured with for a normal person, not a big deal. For one of those preconditioned existence, it's a big deal. So that's why we got all the records and we found out that kind of stuff. But so he was in there in Watakinia and during the exercise, and the general, when generals go out to the field, that kind of stuff, they've got a generator and a trailer and where they work out if it's nice and air conditioned. Well, in April in Egypt it's warm. His generator broke. So he sent his aide over to our colonel, because he didn't know why our colonel had a generator, but he went over to snag our generator so the general would be comfortable. And Colonel Potter was trying to get a gruff guy anyway. So the aide came up to him, told him what he wanted, and he just told him pound sand. So the aide goes back to the general. General now bows up because he's been disrespected. So he goes there and jumps in Colonel Potter's face. Colonel Potter said, General, let me tell you the chain of command. Secretary of Defense, General Vaught, and me. Do you hear your name in there anywhere? And so just dismissed him. But that's one of the stories that missions like this have stories. This is where the air crew was stationed. I always keep a picture because this is the only time we were in these and you guys were in those. This is the only time I've had better accommodations in 27 years than y'all. So I always have this picture. So the night we're told to go, one thing I didn't mention was, again, inventing everything. 2 guys in our unit actually invented the SATCOM radio. One was a former Air Force NCO that got out, went into the Army as a warrant officer communicator so he could stay in it. He and one other guy literally soldered together two types of radio, air-to-ground, satellite, and air-to-satellite radios, and invented the SATCOM radio. There were 6 of them in the entire free world when we did this mission. One was with the president, one was in the Pentagon, and 4 were on the mission. So the night, and because there's only 6 of them, and they're all devoted to the mission, we had all mounted speakers on all the handsets, so everybody could hear what was being said. So the night of the 23rd, President Carter's very distinctive drawl came on the radio and said, "You guys have permission to go." And we get all gathered back to hear it. Boom, we go back to our beds, we're trying to get to sleep. The radio goes active again, about an hour after the president told us to go. It was the Central Intelligence Agency, and they said, "Hey, we just had one of our agents flying out of Tehran. He recognized the Pakistani cook and that had been cooking the meals for the hostages. He debriefed them, and this is what the intelligence we now have." Do any of you think we'd be that lucky to have that kind of data dump at the last minute? Go back to the Sante raid 10 years prior. If you guys remember that story, the CIA had known that those great Americans had infiltrated the most heavily air-defended corridor, and there were no hostages, no prisoner of war there. And the CIA had known that for 6 months and just didn't think it was worthy telling the DoD guys to risk their lives. So for this mission, an hour after the president says go, they give us all this data. And they think that we can actually reorganize, retool, and reduce our numbers to complete the mission. Well, and again, that goes back to why we have our own military special intel unit now. But saying that was that night. Following morning, we're all lined up to go. General Boykin, you guys remember hearing about the Lieutenant General Boykin? He was an Army 3-star that was the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. He got in trouble for talking about Muslim being a Muslim of hatred, but he was in uniform. He got in trouble for that. Here he is as a captain leading us in prayer. Did a very powerful job. I'll tell you that everybody that was in that hangar came out okay that was in the prayer session. There's a Bible verse, Matthew 18, verse 20, when 2 or 3 or more gather together in my name, I am with you. Everybody that was in that prayer session, and my whole squadron was in that burning C-130, we came out okay. The guys who died that night weren't with us. I'm going to fast forward 3 years. When he went to Grenada, I went to him, asked him to do the same thing, and most people came out okay. The only guy seriously hurt was him. He took a 51 cal through the shoulder. So I don't know who he pissed off, but I'm happy he took care of me again. So the plan was in Oman that you'd have the first aircraft, MC-130, would lead go through the route selected and determine if the intel, if the radar and all the everything that was the enemy had to put on us, if that route was good for the 53s coming in behind it. So he went in first, then the number 2 was going to lead in the MC, EC, MC, 2 ECs. And then because of the MOG on the airfield, the planner didn't do the right planning. On the right-hand side is how they really went in. This is the knee board for the mission. I think you guys like the high-tech part of it, but I think some of the older guys saying, what's wrong with that? That worked. The 53 contribution. So I've already mentioned the capabilities of the minesweepers, that kind of stuff. General Vought, the mission for this, commander for this, he was a 2-star at the time. You know, when a major mission fails, how many guys get promoted out of that afterwards? He actually made 1 more star out of it. He retired as a 3-star. And I've heard him talk about this mission several times. He's already passed away. But during his brief, he'd always call the Chief of Naval Operations, the 4-star, like the Chief of Staff of their Navy. He called him a traitor every time he talked about him. That's pretty powerful language for a 3-star talking about a 4-star. Why? But being an aviator, he said he asked permission twice from the CNO to go out and inspect the Nimitz and the aircraft being held on there, protected, berthed in there, to see how the training was going, the readiness and that kind of stuff. And the CNO said, no, you can't go. And so that, and you mentioned how Rocky said Carter's 1 more request would have been 1 more helicopter. In the mission, you guys, I don't know if you picked up on that, I sure did. During this whole mission effort, we knew that we had to have 6 helicopters leaving Desert 1 to continue the mission. That was the abort. We lost one more than we needed. So we're only given 8. The chief of naval operations said, I could only put 8 helicopters on this aircraft carrier. That's all you can, that's your planning factor. So we could only lose 2. In the Holloway Commission that followed, we found out that that was true if this aircraft carrier had a complete complement of fighter planes. It didn't. They could have put 12 helicopters on here. That would have given us a few more spares, right? That's point 1. Point 2 is when the chief of naval operations put the word out to his squadrons to give up 8 helicopters. These helicopters were on a one-way trip. At the end at Manzaria, they're going to be thermite grenaded. So these helicopters are going in, they weren't coming back out. That was never the plan. We were going to burn them in place after the mission. That was a given. CNO put the word out, give me your helicopters. He never told the losing unit, they told him, you'll never get it back, but he didn't tell them why. If you're the maintenance guy, and you don't, all you know is you're getting rid of a helicopter, you don't know why, are you going to give up your best? Or are you going to give up some hangar queens? So that ties into the story later. And another last part about this is on board here in the Holloway Commission, they found that when somebody was tinkering around down in the bay, they hit the wrong switch and it foamed one of the engines. So they cleaned it at sea, put it back on the helicopter, and never tested it until they flew it for the mission. Can you see kind of a comedy of errors going on here? But I do want to say one thing positive about this whole thing here. The captain of the Nimitz, what the Navy had done, every time we have a flotilla out there, we know that the enemy puts trawlers or something behind to keep an eye on us. And so what the Navy, the Russians had a trawler on these. The Navy sent 2 flotillas, 2 aircraft carriers into the Gulf there. And they had one that was very active, deliberately. So most of the attention was on that one. And they had this one that was less active, just kind of just staying out there floating. So they only had a single trawler following this guy. We were afraid of the trawler because we figured they would rat us out. If they saw anything suspicious, that they would obviously tell Iran to gain favor with them. And so the captain of the Nimitz had to figure out a way that he could break contact with that aircraft carrier from the trawler long enough to bring the helicopters out, 8 of them on an elevator. I don't know if you've ever seen that. That's not a very fast thing that happens. Bring all 8 up, build them, unfold the blades and launch them. What he came up with was he would do cat and mouse with them at dusk. And he figured out when they ate their meal. Initially, they'd always stay with them. But after doing this for 6 weeks, he'd pull away, they would stay behind and go catch up. So he figured out that was supper time. They get tired of the cat and mouse, they just eat first, then catch up. But he never did it at full speed until the night of this. And so the night of this, he punched out full speed. They brought the 8 aircraft helos up. Like this picture used to be classified top secret. This is the actual liftoff. But he broke contact with the trawler. They built all the blades up, flew off, and then he turned back around and went back to where the trawler was, so it prevented them from seeing them on the radar image. So that was the ruse that he came up with on how to make the mission happen. So, I went the wrong way. So, from the Nimitz, I already showed you further down south was Oman, where we're doing the crossload. On the Nimitz here, the terrain was 2 mountain ranges, and then there were the 2 sandstorms. Well, the Meteor, we had very little desert fighting experience, not like you guys have today. And the meteorologist never even told the pilots that the big Haboobs could even be an option. So when those guys went through it, that was a surprise for the first time. Additionally, all the 53s, what they had for navigation was the compass, and the CIA had loaned them Doppler radar capability. They were bolted on like a footlocker strapped to the deck of the helicopter. That's what they had for navigation going in, because GPS wasn't invented until '83. So you had the distance from where the ship was to where Desert One was. How many of you guys flew over Colorado? So you guys imagine Colorado, if you have the front range, or where Denver, Colorado Springs are, and you have the back range, the west range. If you took the big mountains out of the middle, put that in your mind. These guys flew from western Colorado through those two ranges to eastern Kansas. That was what they had to do that first night. And none of them, back then we didn't train to that standard, but that's what the Marines had to overcome. So even though they didn't do well at it, they did survive at it, but again, it goes back to just what happened to them. But that was the distance. So I told you earlier, we started off with 8 helicopters. We had to have 6 to continue the mission from this point. So in the very first, let me go back one. Very first one we lost was Dash 6. When it got in between the two radar, let me back up for a second. Weight was very critical. So the helicopters had come up with a plan of how to reduce the weight to hold more gas and hold all the operators and our equipment. And one of the things they did was they convinced General Vought that they had secure radar, secure radios, the KG-25s, I think was what it was at the time, but they weighed 45 pounds each. 8 helicopters, 8 times 45, well, that's 2 people. So they said, we'll take the secure radios out, save some weight, because we'll fly so close together that on the back of those 53s, they can use those light pads. They're going to use those for signal each other a formation flying. They never envisioned what they had to go through, but General Vought said, go ahead. So they have no secure comms. So when they get between the first 2 mountain ranges, this is Marine pilots flying a Navy aircraft. On this aircraft, that Dash 6, the master caution light came on saying that your bird has lost the nitrogen in the blades. In the Marine variant of that aircraft, that means the blade's going to disintegrate in about 5 minutes. So they were taught, you have that caution light, you put it down. Well, the guy did what he was trained to do. The crew behind him saw him pick that guys up and they continued on. Because they had not gone through the cross training because of OPSEC and timing, afterwards they found out the Navy had fixed that problem. That aircraft had at least 40 more flying hours in it. And as I mentioned to you guys, they were all on a one-way trip, so we lost our first aircraft because of the cross training and the lack of secure comms. Because if they had secure comms, that one other Navy guy could have said, hey, disregard, keep flying. So we lost one good aircraft. I jokingly say that aircraft is probably somewhere between by Noah's Ark, because it's still out there today, lost somewhere. So then the second aircraft we lost was in the second sandstorm. The actual mission commander for the helicopters was an aircraft number 5. And they lost their Doppler. Things were getting hot. And so he aborted and came back. So now we're down our 2 spares. Every other aircraft has to be flying. So when we get there, I've already talked to this. So what happens on the ground? So the CCT guys, CIA, Bud McBroom and Jim Ryan, were the 2 pilots that flew in Kearney to do the soil sampling of the land. And you guys know how that works. They put the box lights in and they've soil sampled it. So they established 2 landing zones. The one on the south side here, they put in the remote lights. And then when the first aircraft came in, they put another set of lights in on the north one. So we basically had 2 landing zones for everything coming in. So the idea was the 130s would come in first, and the 53s would come in behind. It set up the fuel lines out of the back of the 130s so that the 53s get refilled and drink off of those until it was time to go. So what happened on the ground was the CIA, when they flew in the soil sampling team, was the Twin Otter. Well, Twin Otter weighs about the same as the C-130, right? So when the 130 pilot went in, he was very afraid of, is the soil really going to hold us? So he came in quite hard. And on that G meter reading, I was told it was reading something like 9. He hit 3 landings out of it because he didn't want to get bogged down in the sand. So they had one of the SATCOM radios. They called back to the Pentagon. Pentagon called over to Lockheed Martin. They gave them the G meter reading. And they asked what should we do, and Lockheed Martin said, you got to leave that aircraft in place. We got to come out and inspect it. Yeah, that didn't happen that night. So literally, that was the first thing that happened. We just landed, B squadrons on it, and I'm near the front of the aircraft. So one of the first teams that got off, there was a bus came by. Think like a Greyhound, regular commercial bus came by, and so our guys stopped it in the road and. They try to use Russian accents as they're going to throw anybody off. Okay, that's what they did. They told them, they stopped the bus driver. They had lights on, so it wasn't like they were smuggling night. They stopped the bus. Basically, now we had our own 44 hostages. Okay, so they called back and with SATCOM made a plan. Well, just put those 44 people on Aircraft 1, bring it back out to Wadakinya, and tomorrow when you come in, we'll drop them back off. They'll get some freaking flyer miles. They'll be in a different city, but we'll call it a day. So we have our own 44 hostages, and that's what we did. So then the next thing that happened was the Rangers at that time had got to both ends of the airfield with those security teams. Remember I mentioned that light anti-tank weapon on the motorcycle? So on the south end here, a gas truck comes up. It did not have its lights on, so we assumed it was a smuggler truck. But in any case, as soon as that truck saw the checkpoint, he just did a U-turn to get away. Well, that young Ranger used that light anti-tank weapon to slow him down very effectively. Big old fireball. Up until this point, everything was engines running. So you had a lot of noise, but no light. Now you got this big-ass fireball in the air. And it actually worked out to our advantage, because at this point, all the 130s were there, but none of the helicopters made it in, because they're flying through the storms. Every one of them, they're all dispersed. They all said that we saw the fireball, it's got to be those guys. And it was. So now we're a happy family. We got our lighthouse beacon going on. We got everybody's all united. So we've done all the cross load, and we had all got on the 53s. We're all excited to go. And then there was the call for all of us to get off the 53s and get back into the 130s. What we found out later was that helicopter number 4 had lost its secondary hydraulic pump, which means it could still fly that night, but it was not going to start in the morning. I'd mentioned to you that because weight was so critical, the crews had all got together and thought of, okay, we can't all carry spare parts, so let's divide up what spare parts we need, and we'll share them on the airfield. And nobody thought to bring a hydraulic pump, because that was not a part that habitually broke in the 53s. That goes back to we were given hangar points, because we had parts breaking that shouldn't have broken. So now we're below mission minimum. So the crew gets with the General Vought. They call back to President Carter and they say, hey, we're below mission minimums. What do you think we should do? Kudos to President Carter. He deferred to the mission commander. He said, what do you recommend? And they said, let's recock it. Let's bring it all back and let's start over again another day and go from there. And that was the decision. President Carter went with that. So the order was given. We all got back onto the 130s here. And the order was the 130s would reel in the hoses and then they would pull away. And then the 53s would go back out to the Nimitz. All was going good. The distance between the Helos and the C-130s is about, for me, the wall over there, okay? Because the blades turned, but that's how close they were. So we're and my squadron, we're all in C-130 number 4 there. Helo number 3, commanded by Major Schaefer, he violated the order to stay on the deck. So when all the C-130 was pulling away, we assumed, because he lived, the guys who caused the accident, the pilots lived. It was the crews, his rear enders and the front enders of the 130 that died. We assumed that when he lifted off, do any of you know Chief Lampy? He was a CCT guy. He was the first senior listed for SOCOM. He was standing right in between the two aircraft there. We assumed that the pilot used him as a visual reference, but never told him. So how many of you have been underneath a 53 or an Osprey, the prop wash? You felt that. It's pretty significant, especially fully loaded. So we were assuming is that when he lifted off, his thought was to do a left pedal turn and get out of the area so he wouldn't eat the dust. He lost at vertigo. He knew that happened. He says he couldn't remember seeing anything. And he actually went underneath. Major Schaefer went under hypnosis to see what he could remember and still wasn't able to, trying to figure out what happened that night. But the vehicle, they saw Lampy. They assumed that he stayed on Lampy. Lampy, because the prop wash is being pushed back toward the 130, and then the 53 is inching its way into the 53. Now, as I told you, I was sitting on the left-hand side up there, right behind the crew door, what I remember that I very vividly remember, I was actually laying down because the fuel bladders had about 18 inches of fuel on it. I was thinking, it's like a king-size waterbed. This would be a nice ride home. So I was laying down, I was looking up at my buddy, and as I was looking past him, I saw 3 strikes come in the side of the aircraft. That was the blades. So I'm gonna use my hands here for a second. 130, 53, blades turned this way, it hit, and just walked it around and crushed it down on the nose of the aircraft. So that's what, and so when it crushed down, you know, when I first saw the sparks, you had kind of that duh moment, you know, and then the front end dropped down about 4 feet and the door literally blew straight in. I mean, there was no hesitation. Big fireball into the cockpit. Obviously, refuel, bird, fire. We're Army guys, but we're smart enough to know that's not where we want to be. And so, let me go to the next. This is the outcome of it. You can see, this is where the 53 is, and so here's the rest of the aircraft. So when we got out on the right hand, as you're going to the rear, on the right hand side, they threw the doors open, the jump doors on both sides. Fire already came in the right hand side because it already pulled pitch, so it took the fire immediately down. So they closed, the rear is already closed up, the right side is now closed up, so the left side's our only way out. So I'm in front, I'm looking to the back, and I'm seeing that, well, the door, you know, you can see it's dark out there, but it's not fire. By the time I got from the front to the back, there's already fire there. Now, initially, when we all jumped up, because we're on like a king-size waterbed, like a carnival house, and all those straps, there was a lot of tripping and stuff going on. We all hooked onto each other and made our way to the back. We think we got out of that aircraft in about 20 to 25 seconds. And already the red-eye gun and some other stuff, the ammo was already cooking off, going out the side of the aircraft. That's how hot it was, how fast it was. But when I got to the door to jump out, there's already fire going across it. The silly thing going through my mind was, well, hell, they jumped through fire in a circus, just jump hard. Of course, what choice would I have? You know, so I jumped hard. The prop wash knocked me down to my hands and my knees. In the Army, they used to have a thing called the high crawl as part of the physical fitness test. I know I set a land speed record because as I'm doing the high crawl and passing somebody, I only see his feet, but I passed him. I was motivated. So I basically, from going out here to about where the explosion line is where I stopped. As soon as I felt it was no longer hot, I got up, turned around, and at that point, 2 guys literally got blown out of the helicopters. I mean, out of the 130. Your J.J. Byers, the loadmaster I mentioned earlier, he was in the back of the 130, and when this thing caught on fire, as we're all going out the back, he's going up to the cockpit to try to get his pilot friends out. Back then, Air Force did not like special ops aircraft. It was planning on moving all the MCs and ACs over to the National Guard. That was the plan, move them out of the active duty. And that was one of the things that SOCOM, the Holloway Commission, precluded that. That's why it stood up SOCOM. But bottom line is, there was only, at that time, 1 crew per bird. So when this mission came down, the crew commander went to J.J. Byers and says, you don't need to go on this mission. Because J.J., his wife had left him a few months before this as a single father of 5 girls. And so commander says, you don't have to go. He said, okay, who's going to replace me? There was no one in the inventory that was trained and qualified to replace him. So he went on the mission. So he's the guy that went into the cockpit to try to get his buddies out. He's the guy that was one of our guys. So he comes out of the cockpit, he's coming down. Our last guy, Paul Lawrence, was getting ready to jump when he hears JJ call for help. Paul runs back across the bladders, grabs him, puts his field jacket around him, gets him to the back door. And just when they got there, the bladder blew up and blew him out. So they were both peppered in that aluminum to their clothes. So I'm right about here. There's 2 other guys who were close to me. We ran back and grabbed them. I ended up with JJ with his head toward me, body this way, a guy on each side. My hands are underneath his shoulders. Because this aircraft, the ammo was already cooking off coming out of Bird 4. Bird 6 had already moved over to the other side of the berm here to get away. So we're chasing it, trying to catch up with it, carrying this wounded man. And The light is, the only light I have is from the fire. Yeah, that's kind of fickle light. But I'm looking at his hands. He has his hands up like this. I'm thinking, shoot, his Nomex gloves burned off his hands. That was the skin off the bones of his fingers. He had stayed up there that long trying to get his buddies out to no avail, but he lost his digits and parts of his lips and ears and nose. But we kept him alive. He passed away about 10 years ago. He was down at Duke Field, if any of you guys were down that area. So that was what happened with Paul, and Paul got a soldier's medal out of that, and I don't know what JJ got, but because President Carter had declared this being a humanitarian mission, all the awards that came out of it were peacetime awards. So that's what happened. So we finally got everybody over to Bird 6. Bird 6 is on this side of the berm. The lights on this side were brighter because they were fresh, and so with the weird light, the aircraft were lining up on the south side to go across the north side. Intelligence said this road is never used. You're not going to have any vehicle traffic on it. I've already mentioned what we said. And to show you how wrong they were, the road had been so freshly road graded. There's a big pile of gravel that when Bird 6 went across it, no, Bird 4, we were okay on 6. Bird 5 went across it. It actually knocked out one of the 130 blades, one of the engines. So it had a wobble coming home. On another aircraft with the Rangers, one of the Rangers had their in-flight coming home, and he had his hand in his pocket. When he came out, he had a hand grenade in his pocket. No pin. No pin in his pocket, no pin around him. It had just been sitting there, cracked from going off by the pressure of his pocket. So the guys improvised. A roll of duct tape does wonders, and they used the entire roll of duct tape on his hand. He came out that way. Another funny story I want to share. Can I have some humor in here too? One of our guys on the back of the aircraft there, when he was in the back, he had fallen asleep when all this was going on. So when he woke up to the fireball and saw everybody jumping out, he thought we're already in flight. So we're all airborne, so he looks around for all the parachutes. There are none, so he jumps out into free fall position, assuming we're in flight. Shortest free fall record, you know. The only mistake he made was ever telling us he did it, because it was like, Frank, what were you thinking? I just taking it one step at a time. Yeah. So this is what it looked like. So going back to this part of the story, you can see that the 53s on this side are both burnt. This one's not. Because again, they all had their thermite grenades. They were told to, hey, abort, get out of the 53s, torch it so we leave nothing in place, and then get in the 130s to come home. The guy in the center there, the Marine, did not do that, and that wouldn't have been so bad, but on his own volition, he had taken all the plans. He had not only what the routes they were doing, he had copies of where we had our vehicles staged, the warehouses, things like that, so the entire plan was compromised. We know that because Iran publicized all the documents and things that they had afterwards, and we saw all that, and that's where that stuff came from. This is the picture a lot of people see. As mentioned by Rick, we had 8 people very, very, very burnt. We were extremely disappointed after that, but we didn't quit. We immediately went to our second round of planning. That mission was called Honey Badger, and the difference was going to be we weren't going to do every service gets to play. We went to the Army using Army helicopters, Blackhawks, and you guys have heard of the Night Stalkers, the 160. That was the birth of, this mission was the birth of Night Stalkers. They were the Task Force 160th. It took them a decade before the Army designated them as a standing regiment, the Special Operations Aviation Regiment. So this mission was the birth of JSOC. It was the birth of the 160th, the Intel people, the Navy counterpart, Delta, and it was also the genesis for the failures in Grenada, why you have all the other things. Your AVSOC and other stuff were components after SOCOM, but SOCOM came after those units I just mentioned. So that's what we had, that's where it went. Capabilities that, I don't have this slide there. I think you guys, in fact, I do have it. Capabilities that came afterwards. Fast roping. This picture down in the bottom left was the rehearsals we did going into, you guys know Mogadishu, what you guys know is Black Hawk Down, Gothic Serpent. That was our rehearsal of preparing how to land in the city in there. We always used little birds, but never as much as we did, but those kind of capabilities. Here we have the in-flight refuel, a Black Hawk at 53, fast rope, of course, the free fall standoff, hey-ho. Those are all things that we invented afterwards to compensate for the gaps we had. Going back to this for a second, as Rocky said, President Carter came out to meet him. I will give kudos to, again, President Reagan on that. I know the current president, my suspicion is, when Reagan knew that our hostage was being released, he told Carter, go be my emissary. You work for 444 days to get him free. You go be the man that meets him, because President Reagan's already the president at that time. He could have held that to be his privilege, but he had Carter go meet him. And I think it's kudos to both those presidents. After this mission, when it failed, President Carter came out and met all of us. He basically was in a big formation. He had to open ranks. He talked to every one of us between 3 and 5 minutes, just one-on-one. Where are you from? What do you do? Who are your parents? Just a real, genuine man. So kudos to them. That's just an insight. And on that note, I'm going to turn it over to you for questions. Either put you all to sleep or over beer. Yes, sir.
And weren't most of those towns from Hilbert, because they didn't have the Eagle box in the back?
I don't know enough about that to answer it well. I do know that we had Talons and ACs coming out of Kadena. We also had coming out of Herbie. And that was actually part of the routes. I should have mentioned that. The chairman, because we had forces coming from everywhere, the unclassified mission name for this was Rice Bowl. He was hoping that because forces are coming out of the east, that we say, because we knew this was only 7 years after we left Vietnam. If you're one of those, he was going to tell the media, we've got POWs over there, we want to go get them. Please be quiet. That was, so we had that blend of forces, but the details, the technical side, you have to ask one of the air guys. I don't know that. And we're trying to put together just a different, I was just at SOCOM, Special Operations Command, Tuesday, talking to their historian, trying to get a 40th anniversary going, because that's next year. Because never have all the assaulters met with a big chunk of it's never been formal. Like I'll bump it, and this is an honor to meet Rocky today. I've talked to some of the others, but it's never been a formal gathering of all the different tribes that were involved in the mission to spend time together. So we're trying to put that together. So maybe at the 40th we'll get some better answers. Sir?
I've heard for coming on 40 years now that it was the students. By their actions, they don't seem like students to me. They seem like they had some military training or something other than, English and parsing.
I would have, and as Rocky said, there was already a group out there just doing the normal chanting, the student part. Yes. But then the people that were the core cadre that came in with the right equipment with the intent of staying longer. Right. But they also had some support later to get them better. So I would agree with you. It was a core group of people, and I can't say that based on the debriefings of the hostages, they were mean, they were evil, but they weren't that well trained. They knew how to, they got help to do all the interrogations, things like that with day visitors. Because again, the security of the compound, things like that, they did nothing overtly, because just watching the ABC, NBC, CBS stuff, we could see what was changing on the terrain of the compound. If they had been an organized group, we would have expected the things that came after the raid to be done before the raid. I think it's Miller time then. Thank you all for the time. Thank you for the service.